Broadly speaking, Microsoft Windows PowerShell is a task automation framework. And its purpose is to be a little easier to use than a full-blown development tool where you actually build executables and make it easy to do things. So it contains a command line shell, which is kind of similar to the command window that you're probably already used to using. It also has an interactive editor with things like IntelliSense and automatic completion for statements. And in both the command line shell and the interactive editor, you use the Microsoft PowerShell scripting language. The scripting language itself is based on the .NET framework. And so when you're writing scripts in PowerShell, you have complete access to the entire .NET framework, all of its classes and methods and different data types, which means that aside from having a simplified user interface experience, Microsoft Windows PowerShell is extremely powerful, given that you can do .NET programming from a command line shell without ever having to build or package anything. It also gives you access to traditional COM and Windows management instrumentation interfaces, and that lets you do all sorts of administrative tasks with Windows PowerShell, which is at the core of what it does. Now, Windows PowerShell wouldn't be that useful if you could only run it on one machine. In fact, you can administer thousands of machines from a single machine using Windows PowerShell because it allows you to script both locally and execute scripts on remote machines. So let's get started at actually looking at Windows PowerShell. We're going to jump over to a demonstration machine and take a look at the command window and some of the things that you can do to help you get started and oriented with PowerShell. Okay, so here we have a computer that is running Windows Server 2008 R2, and on this computer I have installed the current version of PowerShell, which is PowerShell 3.0. Now, when PowerShell 3.0 is installed, you're going to get access to a couple of things. The first one we're going to look at is the actual PowerShell command window. All right, and we're going to compare and contrast this with the traditional Windows command box. So let's go ahead and open up a command prompt. And I'm also going to open up the PowerShell window itself. I've already pinned this up onto my start bar because I'm going to use it throughout. And I'm going to go ahead and run Windows PowerShell as an administrator. And we'll put these two windows side by side. Now, right away, there's some things I want to change because this white on blue doesn't look very good on video. And so I'm going to show you that you have some options. We're going to go over here and go to Properties and just choose colors, and I'm going to change the screen background to be something a little easier to read. I'm going to change it to be white. Now that doesn't look any good because you can't see the actual prompts, so I'm also going to edit the foreground, and we'll just make that black. Alright, you might be surprised to know that you can actually do the exact same thing in the command window. Right, so already we can see that there's some sort of kinship here. Now, there are all kinds of DOS commands that you probably know already and use all the time, like we can type dir over here in the command window, and if we switch over to the PowerShell window, I can do the same thing. You can see that the formatting of this is a little different. So while the syntax to run the command is the same, obviously something a little bit different is going on. In fact, what's happening in PowerShell is that it has aliased all of the traditional DOS commands and then some with actual PowerShell commands. And so the dir command that we just ran actually executes a command called get child item. Now, you can't see my hands, but I didn't actually type out child item. I just started typing and then I hit tab and the window auto-completed for me. But if I say get child item and hit enter, you can see that it does exactly the same thing as the dir command does. Now, one thing that's great about PowerShell is it comes with this really extensive help system. And so I can learn more about how the get child item command works by using another command called get help, and then just following it with the name of the command I'm interested in getting help about. So this is get child item. And you can see that this takes all sorts of different options. I can provide a path and a filter and include different things. And this is great. Now there's help for every single one of the PowerShell commands, and also a lot of help topics that are basically large articles that tell us how to do things in PowerShell. One of the first things that you're going to want to do when you install PowerShell and open it up for the first time is run a special command called update help. And what this does when you run it is it goes out to the internet and it downloads all of the current help files. So you might even want to do this from time to time if you haven't used a machine recently, just to make sure that you have the current up-to-date help. Now there's a lot of help topics, like I said, and we can see those by passing some different things into get help. We can see this actually if we do get help, it'll even give us information about itself. And you can see down here at the bottom it says related links, so we can pull up these articles that say about command syntax or about parameters just by passing those as an argument to the get help function. All right, so let's do that real quick. We'll just take a look at about parameters. All right, about parameters, and you can see that it even auto completes here for me if I hit the tab key, and I get this really long article about parameters. Now, I don't know about you, but I find the reading of the help topics in the actual PowerShell window to be a little bit painful. I don't like the font, it's just not the nicest experience. And so we can also get help for most of the help topics from online and read it in the browser. So let's do get help again, and this time we'll do get help for get help one more time, except this time we're going to pass the switch online to it. And you can see the browser opens right up and takes me to the current help topic on TechNet for the get help command. I can even copy and paste these examples out of the window if I want to. Now, as I mentioned a second ago while I was doing that demonstration, today we're looking at PowerShell 3.0. And PowerShell 3.0 comes pre-configured if you happen to be running Windows 8 or Windows Server 2012. But if you're running Server 2008 or Windows 7, you're going to need to install it. And to install it, all you need to do is download the Windows Management Framework 3.0. And then if you're on Windows 7 or Server 2008 R2, you can install it there. Unfortunately, if you're on a previous version of the operating system, you're going to have to use PowerShell 2.0 or earlier. Now, when we were looking at PowerShell just a second ago, we were in the PowerShell command window, or the PowerShell shell. When we were looking at PowerShell just a second ago, we were in the PowerShell command window, or the command shell. But PowerShell comes with another tool called PowerShell ICE, and ICE stands for Integrated Scripting Environment. And the reason it's called the Integrated Scripting Environment is because it contains a command shell, but it also contains a bunch of tools. For example, it has a command builder that will let you actually build commands using a form-based tool. Of course, it's got integrated help, just like you saw in the command shell, and it has a script editor that comes with a debugger, which comes in very handy and is in fact indispensable if you are writing complicated scripts. All right, so let's take a look at PowerShell ICE. That is actually what I'm going to use to do most of the demonstrations from here on out. Here on my virtual machine, I have gone ahead and pinned the PowerShell ICE window to the taskbar. I'm just going to go ahead and click this and it's going to open up. Now you can do this yourself if you'd like to pin it. PowerShell is under Accessories, Windows PowerShell. So you just open this up and right click and choose Pin to Taskbar, Pin to Start Menu, and it'll put it there and make it much easier for you to get to instead of having to drill down. And then another tip, of course, is you can always, here in the little text box under the Start button, just start typing PO, and it's going to give you Windows PowerShell ICE as a program that you can run. But here is the ICE editor, and you can see that it's divided up into a couple of different panes. Here at the bottom I have the command shell, and it works just like you saw in the command window, except it's got some nice IntelliSense features. And then up here at the top I have a scripting pane where I can write scripts. And it also has IntelliSense features. Alright, so we're going to go ahead and just close the script window for now, and I'm not going to save these changes. We'll take a look at another one of the tools here that is very, very helpful for beginners. So under the tools, or actually, let me back up a second. Much like the command window, this doesn't look very good on video, and so I'm going to change the color scheme for this to make it a lot easier to read. So I'm going to go under Tools Options, and you can see that there is a theme option that's available to us. Now, I've previously customized this theme, but for whatever reason, on this version of ICE, when you open it up, it doesn't reload the theme that you set it to use before. So I'm going to click Manage Themes and select my customized theme and hit OK. Well, it's even sillier than I thought. Let's pick this theme and hit OK, and we'll click Apply. And this is a lot easier to read, as you can see. So what we want to do is actually go under the View menu and choose Show Command Add-on. All right, and here you can see all of the different things that I could type into the PowerShell console, or the PowerShell shell, in order to execute a command. So a little while ago we used getChildItem. Let's check out getChildItem again. I can just start typing and it'll narrow it down, and if I select this, I can get a whole list of the parameters that are available for getChildItem, as well as a link to help just by clicking it. And this does exactly the same thing as typing in get help, except it gives me a nice little window, which can be very, very handy when you're kind of in the middle of writing a script, and you don't also want the get help to appear in the middle of your interactive script that you might happen to be writing. At this point, I have a little confession that I have to make, which is that I've been a little bit imprecise in my terminology that I've been using just for simplicity's sake. Earlier I called getChildItem and getHelp PowerShell commands, but in fact they have a much more specific name, which is commandlet. And commandlets are the heart of PowerShell. Now, the astute folks among you have noticed that there's a pattern to the way PowerShell commandlets are named, and that is that they follow a verb-noun convention. So we have commands like getChildItem and setDate and formatList. In fact, Microsoft publishes a list of approved verbs so that people can follow a convention. But get always means the same thing, and set always means the same thing. And so you're encouraged to follow the same convention. But even if you don't when you build your own commandlets, if you can just remember that it follows a verb-noun pattern, it makes it much, much easier to find the commands that you want to run, especially considering that you have the command builder and the autocomplete functionality in PowerShell ICE. Now, the commandlets that are available to you come from PowerShell modules. You can load modules to use commandlets that aren't available when you just open up the command prompt or the PowerShell ICE tool. The modules that are available to you are going to be based on the server role and the features that are installed, as well as you can make your own modules or install third-party modules. And PowerShell also has a feature called Profiles, which will let you determine what modules get loaded automatically whenever you open up the PowerShell console. So if you're familiar with tools like SharePoint, you'll know that SharePoint has a SharePoint PowerShell console. Azure has an Azure PowerShell console. And in both cases, these are using profiles to load up the modules that have the commandlets for those particular server technologies. All right, so let's switch back over to our server and explore this a little bit further. In addition to having PowerShell, this server has a few roles and features installed, I'm going to go ahead and open up the Server Manager so I can show you exactly what I'm talking about. So if we expand the Roles tab here, we can see that I've configured this server to support file services, print and document services, and a web server, IS. And each of these has a PowerShell module and associated commands. All right, I can tell when I am in PowerShell ICE what commands I have available by using the command add-on. So if I come over to the View menu and choose Show Command Add-on, and let's just see what we can get. Remember that this is a verb-noun combination with regards to, say, something related to a web server. So if I just type get-w, you can see that I have a get web app domain command, a get web config file, get web URL, etc. and so forth. I can also see this list of commands using a PowerShell command called get command. And get command displays all of the same stuff that we see over here in the command add-on. Now these are the commands that are available in the modules that I have, but not necessarily the commands that are available in my current PowerShell session. So let's say we wanted to experiment with the get web virtual directory command. All right, so we'll just say get web. Get web app domain is going to work just as well for this. Let's just hit enter and see what happens. Well, you see that I got an error message, and what this says is that the get web app domain commandlet command was found in the module web administration, but that the module could not be loaded. And so if I want to load that module, then I need to execute a command called import module web administration being the name of the module. All right, so let's try to do that and see what happens. And this is going to be web administration, and you can see once again that autocomplete works here. So I've specified this, and let's just go ahead and hit enter and see what happens. Well, unfortunately, I got another error message, and what this says is that the module web administration aliases could not be loaded because running scripts is disabled on this system. Well, this is an error that most people run into, or something like this, very soon after they start using PowerShell for the first time, and it's often very confusing. This is, in fact, a safety feature more so than a security feature, even though the category info here says security error and unauthorized access. So in this command shell, I can give myself the ability to do this because I'm the administrator on the machine. And before we go talk about that a little bit greater depth, I'd like to point out that you can get to the command tool. Whoops, certainly didn't mean to do that. You can get to the command tool from ICE by doing show command add-on, but you can also do it if you're in the PowerShell editor by using the show command commandlet. And this comes with PowerShell 3. And when I open this up, I can say, well, let's see what clear event log does. I check it, and I get the same sort of parameters choices that I get if I'm in PowerShell ICE. All right, so let's talk about that error that I just got. So like I said, the execution policy controls what the command shell allows. And a lot of people confuse execution policies, and they assume that it's a security feature. But since I can change the execution policy, it's not exactly a security feature because it doesn't stop me from doing anything. What it really does is it prevents me from accidentally executing a malicious script or from somebody tricking me into running a malicious script. Now, the default setting for execution policy is restricted. And like I said, a lot of people get tripped up when they come into PowerShell for the first time because the restricted policy, in addition to not allowing you to load modules, also won't allow you to run scripts. And so you'll hear people say, well, PowerShell, I don't understand. I opened it up and, I understand it's for scripting, and I tried to run a script and it told me that I couldn't, and that seems very silly. Well, like I said, it's just to keep you from making a mistake. Now, there are several execution policies available to you out of the box. The first one is the one we just encountered, which is restricted. After that, we have all signed. And all signed means that we can run any script as long as it has been signed with a cryptographic key. Most of the time, you're not going to want to sign every single script that you write. And so the most common configuration that people use is actually remote signed. And remote signed says, trust me to run the scripts that are on the local machine, but if I try to run a script that is remote, then it has to be signed. Beyond this, you start getting a little bit dangerous because you could set the execution policy to unrestricted, and that just means, hey, everything goes. And so if somebody can trick you into running a PowerShell script that, makes them an admin, then shame on you for setting your execution policy to be unrestricted. It's also possible to host PowerShell in your own applications as opposed to ICE or the console, the command shell that we saw. And in those cases, you probably want to control security in the application that's doing the hosting. So there is an execution policy called bypass, which just bypasses PowerShell's built-in policy and leaves it up to your application, which is hosting PowerShell. And then finally, there's undefined. And undefined is actually, for all intents and purposes, the same as restricted. So if you have changed the execution policy, or if you've just installed PowerShell initially, the execution policy is going to be undefined, but it's basically the same thing as a restricted policy. Now you can set the execution policy at various scopes. So you could set an execution policy one time just for a process that was running. So if you needed to temporarily change the policy, do some work, once the work is over, have the policy be whatever it was before, you can do that. Next you have current user. And setting the policy for a current user does exactly what you would expect, and this is stored in the registry. And finally we have local machine, and local machine is the default. Whenever you set an execution policy without specifying the scope, local machine is what you're setting it for, which means your frustration the first time you encounter this problem can be very short-lived, because after you set the execution policy the first time, if you do it for the local machine, you're just not going to have to do it again. You can work with the current execution policy using a couple of simple commandlets. It should come as no surprise to you if you're really grasping the idea that these are verb-noun combinations, that if we would like to find out what the existing execution policy is, we can get it, and that is done by get execution policy commandlet. If we want to change it, that means we're going to set it, and we would do that with the set execution policy commandlet. As I said before, the default scope is local machine. You can also set execution policies via group policies in a Windows domain. If you've done that, then when somebody is trying to run a PowerShell script, the most permissive policy is going to win out. So if you set a group policy to make it unrestricted, but it was remote signed on specifically for the local machine, it's going to be unrestricted as a result of the higher level of permission based on the group policy. All right, so we were having that error before. Let's go back to the machine now that we're armed with an understanding of how to get and set execution policies, and make it so that we can actually load that module that we were trying to load a second ago. Okay, so first let's just find out what the current execution policy actually is. So we're going to get it. All right, we'll just say get execution policy, and it says that the execution policy is currently restricted. All right, so I want to be able to import that module, and I'm going to be running a lot of scripts later on probably, and I don't really want to have to deal with code signing for all the things that I'm doing on this machine. So I'm going to change this execution policy by using set execution policy, and the policy that I'm going to pick is remote signed. So if it's on this machine, I'm going to be allowed to do it. Now, I'm not specifying the scope for this, which means that this applies to the local machine, and this is actually going to be written to the registry. So PowerShell is actually going to warn me that I'm changing the execution policy and give me the help topic that I would use with get help if I wanted to read more about the implications of this. Go ahead and say yes. All right, now that I've done this, I can go to Import Module Web Administration, and hopefully we'll see this work. Well, how about that? I didn't get an error, so probably it worked. Let's see what happens if we try to run get web app domain. Nothing happened. We didn't get an error. And that's because get web app domain doesn't have any output. If, as you know, I just picked that command relatively arbitrarily. If I wanted to actually explore more about get web app domain, I could use the command add-in, or I could use show command.